Hey everyone, welcome back. Tonight, we're peeling away the glittering Hollywood gold to uncover the real Cleopatra. Now, I know what pops into your head when you hear that name Elizabeth Taylor shimmering in jewels, or Shakespeare's tragic heroine draped in love and poison. But before we go any deeper, hit that like button if you're into breaking myths wide open. And of course, subscribe not for the algorithm, but because history is way too wild to explore alone. Here's the thing, the Cleopatra you've been sold? Pure Roman propaganda. They painted her as a temptress, a femme fatale who bewitched great men until it all came crashing down. But the truth, she wasn't fully Egyptian. She wasn't just eyeliner and silk. Cleopatra was a polyglot ruler, a sharp strategist, a scientist, and one of the greatest masters of propaganda the world has ever seen. Drop a comment below had you ever thought of Cleopatra as more than a beauty queen? I love hearing your takes. So dim the lights, settle in, and let's step back into Alexandria, not the Hollywood set, but the empire-shaping reality of a queen who was far more dangerous and dazzling than Rome ever wanted you to believe. A dynasty of drama. Cleopatra was born in 69 BCE into the Ptolemaic dynasty, a royal family that ruled Egypt for almost 3 centuries. But here's the twist. The Ptolemies weren't Egyptian. They were Macedonian Greeks, descendants of one of Alexander the Great's generals. For nearly 300 years, they'd ruled Egypt like foreign landlords. They spoke Greek, worshipped Greek gods, and refused to even learn the Egyptian language. And if that wasn't messy enough, their family values could be summed up in one word: incest. The Ptolemies had a habit of marrying their brothers, sisters, and occasionally even nieces. Why? To keep the bloodline pure. In practice, it was less dynasty and more gene puddle. Cleopatra's father, Ptolemy XII, was nicknamed the flute player. Not because he was a skilled musician, but because most people thought he was a weak and useless ruler. His reign left Egypt broke, unstable, and ripe for civil war. So Cleopatra wasn't born into security and privilege. She was born into chaos, debt, betrayal, and a family that devoured itself for power. But at just 18 years old, when most teenagers are barely figuring out life, Cleopatra was forced to take the throne. And what happened next was the start of one of history's boldest comebacks. But her first problem wasn't Rome or Egypt's enemies. It was sitting right next to her, her own little brother. How to stage the most iconic entrance in history. When Cleopatra's father died, she was paired with her younger brother, Ptolemy XIII, to co-rule. Sounds like teamwork, right? Wrong. He was around 10 years old, and Cleopatra was in her late teens. It wasn't a marriage. It was a hostile corporate merger with a child. At first, Cleopatra tried to hold the reins, but her brother's advisors saw her independence as a threat. Soon, they pushed her out, completely forcing Cleopatra into exile. Most rulers would have accepted defeat. Not Cleopatra. She decided to stage one of history's most theatrical comebacks. With her throne slipping away, she smuggled herself into Alexandria, wrapped inside a rolled-up carpet. Yes, an actual carpet. That carpet was carried straight into the palace of Julius Caesar, who happened to be in Egypt at the time. When the carpet was unrolled, out stepped Cleopatra, regal, perfumed, confident. Caesar, a man used to being the center of attention, was stunned. This wasn't just an entrance. It was a declaration of war. Caesar backed her. A civil war erupted. Her brother, Ptolemy XIII drowned in the Nile while trying to escape. And just like that, Cleopatra was back on the throne. But she wasn't content with ruling like her ancestors, aloof, foreign, detached. Cleopatra had a different vision. And to understand how she changed everything, we need to talk about the most overlooked part of her power, the way she embraced Egypt like no one before her. Here's the thing. Cleopatra wasn't Egyptian by blood. She was Macedonian Greek, but unlike her Ptolemaic ancestors, Cleopatra actually embraced the culture she ruled. She dressed in Egyptian style. She worshipped Egyptian gods. She styled herself as the reincarnation of the goddess, Isis. She even had her face minted onto coins wearing Egyptian headdresses. And most importantly, she learned the language. She was the first Ptolemaic ruler in centuries to actually speak Egyptian. But she didn't stop there. Ancient sources claim Cleopatra could speak at least 9 languages: Egyptian, Greek, Hebrew, Arabic, Aramaic, Median, Parthian, Ethiopian, and more. In an age where most kings barely spoke one language fluently, Cleopatra was a walking, talking diplomatic powerhouse. This gave her a massive edge. When foreign envoys visited Egypt, Cleopatra didn't need translators. She negotiated directly, charming, intimidating, and outsmarting them in their own tongue. Imagine being a Roman senator, smug in your toga, and realizing this so-called temptress queen could out-argue you in flawless Latin. No wonder they were terrified. But Cleopatra's brilliance wasn't just in her words. She understood that power could be worn, sprayed, and even bathed in. Which brings us to her most infamous secret weapon. Cleopatra's face has been mythologized for centuries. Ancient writers couldn't stop talking about her beauty, while modern historians debate whether she was actually pretty by today's standards. But here's the truth. Cleopatra's power wasn't in her looks. It was in how she weaponized appearance itself. This was a woman who turned beauty into policy. Take her infamous donkey milk baths. According to ancient accounts, Cleopatra kept hundreds of donkeys on standby just so she could bathe in sour milk. Why? Lactic acid. It exfoliated her skin, leaving her glowing in a time when most people looked like they'd just crawled out of the desert. Her cosmetics were equally intense. She wore kohl eyeliner laced with leadies, poison because it gave her that dramatic smoky eye, while also, according to Egyptians, protecting against evil spirits and even eye infections. For lipstick, she crushed beetles and ants into a crimson paste. For perfume, she had entire factories working on custom blends of cinnamon-heavy scents so strong, Plutarch wrote that people could smell her before they even saw her. But this wasn't vanity. Cleopatra knew that in a world ruled by men, controlling the senses was another form of power. She could walk into a room and overwhelm it visually, aromatically, psychologically. Every bath, every wig, every drop of oil was carefully chosen to project divinity. And it worked. Even Rome's cynical senators admitted she had a presence that shook men to their core. When Julius Caesar met her, he didn't just see a queen, he saw a goddess. And what came out of that union would terrify Rome more than any army could. A baby that terrified the Senate. When Cleopatra met Julius Caesar, he was at the height of his power. A general, a statesman, practically a god in Rome. Their partnership was more than romance, it was politics. Cleopatra needed Rome's muscle to secure her throne. Caesar needed Egypt's grain, gold, and naval power. Together, they became unstoppable. Their relationship shocked the Roman elite. Caesar was already married, yet Cleopatra bore him a son, Ptolemy the 15th Philopator Philometor Caesar, mercifully nicknamed Caesarion or Little Caesar. For Cleopatra, this child wasn't just a baby. He was a political nuclear weapon. She declared him co-ruler of Egypt and styled him King of Kings. She minted coins with both their faces. She paraded him before the people as the living symbol of a new dynasty, Greek, Egyptian, and Roman combined. To Rome, this was a nightmare. Caesarion was a rival to Caesar's official heir back in Rome, Octavian. If Caesarion's claim held, Cleopatra's bloodline would merge with Rome's, creating a dynasty that could eclipse the Republic entirely. And Caesar didn't help calm things down. He openly honored Cleopatra in Rome, even putting up a golden statue of her in the Temple of Venus. For conservative senators, this wasn't just scandal, it was sacrilege. Not long after, Caesar was assassinated by men who believed he was too ambitious, too powerful, too willing to crown himself king. Cleopatra, now widowed, returned to Egypt with Caesarion. But she wasn't done. Rome thought Caesar's death would finish her. Instead, Cleopatra was already preparing her next move that would bring her into the arms of another Roman titan, and into the pages of history as half of one of the world's most legendary power couples. Because if Julius Caesar was the introduction, Mark Antony was the encore, and together they would shake the empire itself. If Julius Caesar was Cleopatra's first Roman gamble, Mark Antony was her greatest bet. After Caesar's assassination, Rome split into factions. Octavian, Caesar's heir, battled for control against Mark Antony, Caesar's loyal general. Cleopatra knew the outcome of this civil war would decide Egypt's fate. So she prepared her most spectacular entrance yet. In 41 BCE, Antony summoned Cleopatra to Tarsus. He wanted answers. Would Egypt support him or side with Octavian? Cleopatra could have ridden in on a horse or walked into his tent. Instead, she staged one of the most unforgettable political performances in history. According to Plutarch, Cleopatra sailed up the Kidnus River on a golden barge with purple sails, the rarest and most expensive dye in the ancient world. Reserved for emperors, silver oars beat in rhythm to music. Incense and perfume poured from the ship in clouds so thick that Antony's men claimed they could smell her before they saw her. And then she appeared, reclining beneath a canopy, dressed as the goddess Isis, attended by servants dressed as cupids and nymphs. She didn't walk into his presence. She descended like a deity. Mark Antony, battle-hardened, feared across Rome, melted instantly. Cleopatra didn't just seduce him. She dazzled him into submission. Their partnership was a fusion of lust, spectacle, and political calculation. Antony gave Cleopatra new lands. She gave him children twins, and later another son. Together, they styled themselves as gods, ruling the East in defiance of Octavian's Rome. But in Rome itself, senators were horrified. To them, Antony wasn't a general anymore. He was Cleopatra's puppet. The propaganda began. Cleopatra was painted as a witch, a temptress, an exotic Eastern queen corrupting a noble Roman. And as the tension boiled, Cleopatra and Antony's fate hurtled to war neither of them could escape. But before the swords clashed, Cleopatra would prove she wasn't afraid of even the darkest sciences, including the art of death itself. Did the snake even happen? The love story of Cleopatra and Antony ended not in triumph, but in tragedy. Octavian declared war. At the Battle of Actium in 31 BCE, Cleopatra's fleet fled under pressure, and Antony followed her. The defeat was catastrophic. Rome invaded Egypt. As Octavian's legions closed in, Antony fell on his sword, dying in Cleopatra's arms. For her, the writing was on the wall. Octavian wanted her alive to parade her through Rome as a trophy queen, humiliated before the people. Cleopatra refused. This is where legend takes over. Roman sources claim she smuggled an asp, a venomous snake, hidden in a basket of figs. She let it bite her, dying a noble, dramatic death. It's a story that painters, poets, and playwrights adored. The queen slain by a serpent, mystical, theatrical, cinematic. But was it true? Probably not. Historians now believe Cleopatra didn't trust her fate to a snake that might not even bite. More likely, she used poison, a carefully prepared concoction she may have been testing for years. Roman writers even accused her of conducting experiments on prisoners, testing which poisons killed quickly, which caused agony, which left the body looking peaceful. She wanted her death to be clean, controlled, and iconic. And that's exactly what she achieved. When Octavian's men found her, Cleopatra lay dressed in royal finery, lifeless but untarnished, with her 2 loyal handmaidens dead beside her. Octavian got Egypt, but Cleopatra got immortality. And that's the irony. Rome thought it had erased her, reduced her to a cautionary tale. But by trying to smear her, they ensured her name would echo for 2,000 years. When Cleopatra died, Rome thought they had finally silenced her. Octavian paraded her children as trophies, seized Egypt's wealth, and began writing history in his favor. And in his version, Cleopatra wasn't a queen, or a scholar, or a strategist. She was reduced to a caricature, the wicked seductress who lured good Roman men to their doom. But history has a strange way of turning smear campaigns into legends. The Romans may have wanted Cleopatra remembered as a warning, but their very slander made her unforgettable. Medieval writers reimagined her as a sinful temptress. Renaissance poets turned her into a tragic romantic heroine. Shakespeare gave her sweeping monologues and a death scene that audiences wept over. Hollywood dressed her in gold-plated costumes and diamonds that bankrupted film studios. Yet behind every reinvention, the real Cleopatra still shines through. She was the first of her dynasty to embrace Egypt instead of treating it like a foreign estate. She was a linguist who could outmaneuver diplomats in their own languages, a scientist who studied poisons and perfumes, a strategist who played the Roman Empire like a game of chess. Cleopatra wasn't just a queen. She was a brand before branding existed. She crafted her image so powerfully that 2,000 years later, we're still talking about her. Rome won the war. Octavian became Augustus, the first emperor, but Cleopatra won immortality. While most of her Roman enemies are just names in dusty textbooks, she remains a global icon, a woman who turned survival into art, and art into legacy. So the next time you hear Cleopatra described as just a seductress, remember this. She wasn't just Rome's scandalous mistress. She was Egypt's last pharaoh, a ruler who embraced a culture her family ignored, a woman who spoke 9 languages in a world of illiterate kings, a queen who made emperors bow, armies fight, and history itself bend to her image. Rome tried to bury her under slander, but instead they gave her a stage. Cleopatra wasn't erased. She was immortalized. And that's what history never told you.